but my first UnPub was 7 years ago. So beautiful title of this. Seems like a lifetime ago. Remember when we were in the Baltimore Convention Center? Who went to UnPub in the Baltimore Convention Center downtown? A little grittier, no horses. So 7 years may feel like a long time, but I also feel like it's not any time at all. Most of us were not very smart when we were 7. This is me at 7. So I picked this topic of just sort of stuff I've learned since my first UnPub as a way to skip around and talk about a bunch of different stuff instead of having to pick. And I put it in 4 basic buckets of stuff I've learned about sort of being creative, getting your brain to work that way. Stuff I've learned about making prototypes, so from like super philosophical to super hands-on stuff. A little bit about testing and iterating on games, and a little bit about the psychology of being at events like this and just like psyching yourself up for playtesting if that's a thing you find hard. I know it's harder for some of us than others. But being in big crowds does not come naturally to me. So I have learned things along the way that may be helpful to some of you. So being creative. My first piece of advice or thing that I have learned is that it really helps to experience wonder in the world and figure out how to translate that into games. Wingspan really was a labor of love coming out of my love of birds. And my other games have been I would say every game that I have made has been like, this is a really cool thing in the world that more people should know about. And I'm not necessarily saying that all of them have translated into, like, everyone else gets super excited about this thing that I love. But I do think that it gives you a head start on number 1, getting other people excited about your game. Number 2, getting yourself excited to keep working on something for a long time. And in some cases, you will find that you can tap into a pre-existing community of people. So like Wingspan has jumped out of board games into the birding world. I just got back from a birding conference where I was one of the main speakers. Which, who would have thought that like a board game could jump like that, but it can. But experiencing this kind of wonder and translating it into board games requires you to do things besides board games in your life, which is hard for a lot of us because we can get a little obsessed. So I think it's important to hold space in your life to do other things, to take in information about the world that can then inspire you in your board game design. So I keep a long list of games I might make someday on my phone, and the ideas come from really random places, but these are some of the ones, and this is a very specific list of things I find really cool. Your list would look totally different, possibly. There's a great account on Twitter called Strange Animals that's just like really weird animal pictures. Public domain review is super fun because everything that they post about is in the public domain, so you're like total head start on like IP issues for your game, right, if it's coming from that stuff. But also just really cool like historical botanical art and I don't know, random stuff that's super interesting to me. When I worked on The Hill, I had a colleague who was a speechwriter who swore by reading obituaries to get good stories. The people, so not like the family written obituaries, although some of those are really interesting too, but the people who have done stuff in their life that is worthy of getting written up in the paper are really interesting. So that's a game that I have sort of on my back burner, came out of an obituary that I read. Mariposas, I had been to the butterfly sanctuary, one of the butterfly sanctuaries in Mexico where the monarch butterflies overwinter, and was very aware of the whole story of monarch butterfly migration, but I didn't really get sparked to make a game out of it until I read the novel Flight Behavior by Barbara Kingsolver. So just reading novels can inspire you for board games. I listen to a lot of podcasts. These are 4 of my favorite ones. again, very specific to me. Like history and science is my jam. Side Door, if you don't know it, is a great one by the Smithsonian Museum that they like delve into the stories behind things in their collection, which can be really, really fun. So my next thing is clear your mind. Along some of the same lines, get out of the board game world, but also like you gotta get off your phone. This is like, this slide is partly for me. I need this reminder a lot. But there's no accident that people have good ideas in the shower. Like, it is a time when you cannot be doing anything else and your mind wanders, and that experience has been shown to be very important for creativity. I remember listening to an interview once with Moby, where he talked about like if he goes for walks, he will not wear headphones because like he needs that time of just letting his mind wander. And even if you're listening to other music, like that can be enough that it's engaging your brain in a way that it's distracting you from your thoughts. Many of us like to escape our thoughts, but if you don't let yourself have some of that downtime, I think it really can get in the way. I know that when I have taken vacations where I have really crappy internet access, my game design brain just starts firing like crazy. It makes a difference, and we are, most of us, so on our phones all the time that I think we don't even realize how much we're robbing ourselves of that experience. Myself included, for sure. Like, this is something I really have to remind myself about a lot. Getting enough sleep has also been shown to be really important for creativity. So, again, you are robbing. You may be adding hours to your day, but they may not be the hours that you want, right? If you're not sleeping enough. So this is sort of a segue to the next section about actually making things. But my third thing about being creative is to get out of your head, which is something that I really have learned a lot over the many years. So when I first started thinking about game design, tried to do a lot of it in my head, spent a lot of time making notes in notebooks. I'm sure a lot of you have done this. And what I have learned from my process is that a lot of that is wasted time. Because the first time you finally make it and get it on the table, there will be something that you didn't think about while you were thinking about it in your head. And half of the stuff that you planned out doesn't even work, right? So in contrast, if you stop and are like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea, here's some stuff, how would I do it? Like, don't spend a lot of time making it, but just like get it out of your head and mess around with physical components. I know this is not true for everyone. I have heard interviews with people who do really design games in their head, and God bless you, I cannot do it. And I really do feel like it is a time saver to actually spend some time to make things. So this is one of my first draft wingspan cards. It is handmade. So I printed like a few sheets of these little clip art birds, all just the same clip art bird, and just hand wrote everything on the cards. So I didn't even know the term fail faster at that point, but it's a term from engineering that's really this concept of like your first draft of anything is going to fail. So just get it over with, and then you can start iterating from there. So, making prototypes, making stuff. My overarching thing, that I have learned more than anything is that any physical object that you make for your game will change. And it is very important to hold that in your head. Assume everything you'll make will change after your next playtest, and that you might do that 100 more times, right? So, like, if you need your prototype to be good enough, you do need to spend some time on the user interface so people can actually play the game. But you have to find the point where, like, making it nicer is just wasted time, because it's gonna change anyway. And so like don't spend a million years cutting out all of your little bits that you may or may not actually use past the single playtest, right? And this is definitely a lesson learned for me. I have to really stop myself from making everything pretty. I do think there's a place for making your prototypes pretty. At events like this, it will help draw people to your table. So it's not a total waste of time, but you have, I guess I would say, like, do it for the right reasons. Don't do it assuming that you're going to still have that thing next time. So I have some specifics on this. The first one is, oh my God, you have to learn how to automate your cards. How many people here use Nandeck or InDesign or something to make your cards out of a spreadsheet? Okay, so like half the room, maybe. Maybe not all of you are doing games with cards. So this is a screenshot of me using Nandeck for one of the prototypes that I brought for this weekend. And the way Nandeck works, and I'll show you a list of other programs that do it differently. There's a whole variety. But the way Nandeck works is you're basically writing code that tells the program to take things out of your spreadsheet and put them in a certain place on a card. And so, you know, take the words in the column labeled title and put them half an inch from the left-hand side and half an inch from the top in this font, right? And it goes through and it does that over and over for every card. And you can do as many commands like that as you want so that you can get fairly complicated cards, right, all out of a spreadsheet. If you change the formula for the scores on all of your cards, you push one button and it generates the whole deck for you again, right? If you decide you want the little icon in the middle of the card to be in the left-hand corner instead, you change the code for where that icon goes, you push a button, it makes the whole deck. I did not know this before my first UnPub. My first deck of Wingspan for years was me changing every single card. Oh my God, I wish I had that time back in my life. So do this. Nandeck is one option. It is completely free. It does require you to learn how to code. If you do other kinds of coding, it might come pretty naturally to you. There's a very extensive, manual for how to use it. There are many other programs that people have told me they use. I asked on Twitter what people are using these days, and this is a list of the ones that came up. They vary in price and also in how they work in terms of whether you're writing out code or if it has sort of a graphical interface where you're dragging things around on the picture of the card. So look some of these up if you're interested in starting on them, or if you're using one of them and you're curious whether there's something better. I really encourage you to mess around with this. It is worth all the time you will put into the learning curve of getting up to speed on doing this. If you plan on doing game design for a while. There is no way I could have made a deck of 170 Wingspan cards without Nandeck. No way. The columns I have here, so they definitely vary by cost, from free to expensive subscriptions. They vary by platform. But then the other three columns that I put on there are some of the features that I think are really important for the stuff that I do that are not in all of them. Well, data merge is in all of them. That's how I made the list. But, so inline icons is like, when you have the text, use any of this kind of icon and you want the icon in your sentence. Not all of them can do that. And I find that like really important for designing cards. So I would recommend that people figure out one that does it. I have a question marks on infinity and InDesign because you kind of can do it, but people have told me that it's a little clunky how to do it.
InDesign's clunky.
Yeah. In Nandeck, you literally you can define what all your icons are. You give them all names, and then if that name shows up in parentheses in your text, Nandeck will replace it with the icon instead. So it's pretty straightforward. I also use a lot of if-then statements. So like, if this is a card that you can activate, put this color on it. And if it's a card that has ongoing power, then put this color on it. You can do that in some of these programs and not in others. So that's another thing you might want to look for if you're trying to figure out which one you want to use. All right, enough about that. Some bonus tips on making cards that I have learned over the years. I have learned to put numbers on my cards, so numbering a deck of cards 1 through 170 in the case of the Wingspan deck. It makes taking notes in playtesting super easy because you can just be like, on card 17, change this, instead of writing out on the red-throated loon, change whatever. Write on your cards in playtests. I actually, in some playtests, will give everyone a pen and let them write on the cards, so we don't have to talk about it while we're playing. But like, if they have a question and there's a typo or something, like just write it on the card and I'll find it later. So my default method for making cards is to just print on office paper and sleeve them with a playing card. I think a lot of people use that method. One fun tip that I learned is to just make your template for your cards in whatever program you're using skinnier than you actually expect your cards to be, because you will cut them unevenly and you want some wiggle room so that you don't have to like go and cut off all the little edges that you missed, right? So like just make your cards smaller than they should be for the sleeve size that you're using, and it will really speed up your sleeves. But I have also learned that for a big deck, it is insanity to try and sleeve. Like when I do a deck of even like 90 cards for a Wingspan expansion or something, I am not sleeving them. It takes me hours. I don't know about you guys. And there is some threshold beyond which sleeving your cards is just not worth it, and you just put up with shuffling plain cardstock, and it sucks, but it's better than having to sleeve the cards, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm always curious to hear what people's process is on this kind of stuff, because I think it varies a lot from person to person what your tolerance is for sleeving versus not.
You print on thicker paper, so then it's already like basically.
I do it on cardstock, which is thinner than a playing card a little bit, but it works.
It works.
Your playtesters get it. Like, they don't care. It's just a playtest. Oh, and this blew my mind when someone told me this, because I had just cut out a bunch of hexes for Mariposas. I was playing around with like, could I make the map modular? It turned out not to really matter. And then someone was like, you didn't have to cut all those weird ankles. You can just do a brick pattern. And it blew my mind. Because cutting things at, what's the degree in a hexagon? I don't know. Cutting things at that angle is just annoying. Straight lines are better. Never cut hexes. So that's my last time-saving thing. And then just a few things about saving money, which probably a lot of you already know, but it feels worth saying. I came into game design getting the advice, which I think is sound advice, that you are very unlikely to ever make money on your game. It turns out not to have worked out that way for me, but I think it is still sound. And therefore, like, don't spend a lot of money on your prototypes, right? Like, you're eating up the tiny little royalties that you might make. I hope many of us do better, but for bits, like wooden bits cost like at least 10 cents a piece if you order them online, in my experience. You can get a big thing of centimeter cubes. It's worth getting centimeter cubes probably for cheaper, but like other bits, like go to the thrift store and buy old games for $1 or $2 and use their stuff. Pennies cost a penny. That's a lot cheaper than wood. And they're nice and hefty. You can sticker them. A penny is, I think, exactly a 1/4 inch, so you can get like a 1/4 inch. If you really want to get fancy, you can get a hole punch and like sticker them. If you need stuff that's not standard bits, my method is to get full sheet label paper is how it's sold, like for full sheet, like address labels, but they're not cut in any way for address labels, but that's how it's marketed. That's how people use it, right, for packages and things. But you can buy full page label paper and then stick it onto cardboard, which you can take out of your recycling bin. Or I go to mat shops sometimes, and I now have like this huge stack of scraps from a place that mats art prints for framing. And that is like just about the thickness that you expect and sort of the heftiness that you would expect in a board game. So then you can make actually quite nice bits out of stickered mat board scraps. And get yourself an X-Acto knife and a good metal ruler with a hand guard so you don't cut yourself. That is also a thing that I learned that didn't make it onto the slide. And then I've made a fair number of board game boards in my life at this point. And then at some point I realized, like, why am I making the board and stickering the board? Like, a piece of paper is functionally exactly the same. Your playtesters do not care. Do not make a board. Why would you make a board? When is it ever, like, functionally important that that your game is being played that much more off the table than just a sheet of paper? And it takes a lot more work to make it on a board and make it fold right and whatever. Just print it on paper, scotch tape the paper together. No one cares. If you're at a stage where you're really trying to figure out your board and changing things and just like brainstorming, one thing I have had some fun with is if you get sheets of acetate, which is, if some of you are old enough to have grown up with overhead projectors in the classroom, the clear sheets of plastic, acetate, and dry erase markers, and just like mock out your board in dry erase and then erase it as you're playing with it and change things around, and then you didn't even spend the time and money to print something that was changing on the fly anyway. So things to play around with. Also, when you become a game designer, you have a lifetime supply of scrap paper. So this is the box I keep in my kitchen of old Wingspan cards that become grocery lists and to-do lists. So moving on to testing and iterating. At one point, sometime in the last, I don't know, five years ago, maybe a little even less, someone was like, so what's your vision with this game? Like, and I was like, oh, I hadn't really articulated it that way. I was like, oh, I'm going to make a game, here's what works. But over time, I have found this a really actually helpful question. And these are some of the questions that I like to ask myself right at the beginning of the process. So who's the game for? Like, age range, what type of person? What is the story or message that your game is trying to convey? I am of the opinion that almost every game has a message that it is conveying. Some game designers are more conscious and deliberate about that than others. And I think we are, over time, starting to realize that games from the past may be telling messages that we're not super excited to be telling anymore. I could go on a long side rant about that. I'll stay off of it. But it's good to be conscious about, like, what is the story that you're telling within your game, and then in terms of gameplay, what's a player's goal, and what makes achieving that goal an interesting struggle? Like, how is it hard, and is that interesting that it's hard, or is it just randomly hard? And how does that make players feel? How do you want players to feel in your game? And the reason I think some of these questions can be really helpful to articulate ahead of time is that it helps you communicate to your playtesters what you're going for, and if you tell them some of this ahead of time, before you even start playing, it can really help them focus when they're playing, so that if you have told them, I want this to be a family weight game, then the whole time they're playing, they're not trying to push it up to their like super Euro level weight class, right? They're thinking, oh, would this work with my 6-year-old? And they know that that's what you're going for, and so all their feedback can be filtered through that lens. It can also help you filter playtesters' feedback to have articulated some of these things ahead of time. So maybe you don't say some of them out loud to the playtesters, but when someone gives you feedback that doesn't jive with what you're doing, what your vision is, if you have a strong enough sense of what you're going for, I think that can be really helpful in filtering out, okay, that, you know, I really want to listen to this more than that, because this is going in the direction that I see this game where I want it to be. Your vision can change. You may start out saying, I want this to be a family weight game, et cetera, and then play it and realize, oh, this is actually like a really good mid to heavy Euro, and I don't want to pull it in the direction of being a family game. I'm changing my vision, but you can be deliberate about that, right? Instead of sort of ending up there accidentally. Or I just think it can save you a lot of wild goose chases of following people's suggestions without considering where they might take you. Take good notes. This one seems fairly obvious on the face, and I come to game design from a background in social science research where I was interviewing and running focus groups a lot, and so like notes were like my bread and butter. Being able to translate them into reports and things, but so obviously you need to record the things that people are telling you, but I sometimes do run into designers who don't take notes while we're giving feedback in a playtest. And not only do I think that they're doing themselves a disservice, but it feels terrible as a playtester to have someone look like they are not keeping track of the feedback that you are giving them. Right? Like you want someone to show that they care what you're telling them. So even if someone is telling you something that doesn't totally make sense with your game, you don't have to write down everything, but I do think that it shows that you're listening when you are like actively taking notes through, you know, on and off through a playtest feedback session. Some specific things that I have learned better over the years. I now automatically, when I start the page in my notebook that is for this playtest, write down people's names, or I have them write down their own names. I know there are people whose names are not on the wingspan box who should be, because I was not as good about that at the beginning. So now I've like, this is my one habit that I have really cultivated, that I want to make sure I keep track of everyone's names. I am still not great about keeping track of the time that the game starts and ends, which is more important at some points in game development than others, right? Like you don't always have to do that, but there are times that I wish that I had. So try. And then I have found, obviously you want to take notes in the discussion at the end, but I have found that a lot of my really useful feedback is stuff I'm writing down while people are playing, while they're not even consciously giving me feedback. But I'm looking at things like, when are people bored? When are they really excited? Like, when do they throw their hands up in the air because something really great just happened? Like, those sorts of things. And oh my God, Tabletop Simulator and all the online playtesting, like you get none of that. So just like revel in it this weekend that you're getting that kind of feedback from people, and write it down and keep track of like what in your game is causing both ends of that spectrum of like the boredom, the looking at the phone, and also the like super excitement and the engagement. You know, you can keep track while people are playing of how long different things are taking. If things seem like they're dragging, like is it because individual turns are really long, or stuff in between the turns, things like that. I've also started keeping all of my notes in a half-size notebook that fits in my game box, which finally solved the problem of me forgetting to take my notebook with me. So my notes always live in the box with the game, and that for me has been a big help. If you're taking physical notes, I know some people just do it digitally and then you always have it. I love the idea that Marie Kondo has now blessed all of you with the life-changing magic of simplifying. But I mentioned I just got back from a birding festival, and I was teaching Wingspan there to a bunch of people in addition to my talk, and none of us realize how complicated our board games are. Your board game is way more complicated than you think it is. My vision with Wingspan was like, I'm gonna make this game that like has enough meat on its bones to be really satisfying to gamers, but that is like accessible to people who are into birds. And we mostly hit that mark. I really do think that that was like a great place to aim for. But oh man, there are a lot of people in the world who like it is a real stretch for them to learn Wingspan, even when someone is teaching them. So just remember that, because I think for probably most people in this room, Wingspan does not feel like a complicated game. It is a real stretch for a lot of people. Your game is way more complicated than you think it is. And so when I've been thinking about like how could I streamline things, I really look for those moments I was talking about, like what's your favorite moment in this game? What are the moments when people are like physically celebrating something that just happened, and like what can you strip out of the game to take out some of the like fiddliness and just leave the joy? And some of us, take joy in the complicated mess of board games, for sure. But I just think people talk a lot about elegance, right? Of like you want your game to have the fewest sort of rules and fiddliness and like and still have the interesting decisions left, even with a relatively simple rule set. I think that's something a lot of us strive for, and should strive for. All right, so psyching yourself up. I'm a total introvert. Imposter syndrome is real. I'm pretty sure a lot of people in this room have experienced it. It's often described as like you feel like you're overselling yourself, right? Or you feel like you don't deserve to be somewhere. You feel like you're going to get found out that you don't deserve to be somewhere. Everyone in this room deserves to be here. If you have made a game prototype, you are a game designer. You are not an aspiring game designer. You have designed a game. You are here, and you are a game designer. And every game designer fails over and over and over, and it's fine. And it doesn't mean you're a bad game designer. It just means that you're going through the process, and you're getting better. And you totally deserve to be here. And I will say that over and over and over, because it is something that I needed to hear a lot 7 years ago. Folks who are people of color and women, have been shown across many industries to feel imposter syndrome more than white guys do. Support these designers. Tomorrow morning, for those of you that I haven't told yet, we're having a mixer for that sort of underrepresented demographic. Right here, I think there'll be like bagels and juice and coffee and stuff. So come out if you fall into this demographic. What I have found at events like this is that it's super helpful just to make those connections and find some support within that community. But also it's super helpful to have folks outside of the demographic, all you white guys, to just do what you can to like find people who are in, you know, who have tables and go play their games. And let's help change this graph where out of the top 400 games on Board Game Geek, 4% of them have designers who are BIPOC men, and 3% of them were designed by women. I think this is, I don't remember if this graph is by game or by designer, but either way, it looks pretty similar. And this room looks pretty similar to this graph, right? So just be aware that for some women and people of color, this is not a normal experience. This is walking into a room that is like skewed in a way that when I first started going into public gaming spaces, I was like, what happened here that there are no women in this room? Like, it is weird. So just be aware of that and make people feel included. And hopefully we'll get more and more people coming back and we'll shift the graph. So bouncing off of imposter syndrome, I felt also the need to acknowledge the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is this paper where people describe the psychological tendency that when you are new at a thing, some people really overestimate how good they are at that thing. And as you get more expert, you actually become more aware of what you do not know. So as much as I wanted to assure you that you have every right to be here and that you are great, I would also like you to consider the possibility that your game is not the best game ever yet. So stay humble in your playtests. Do not argue with your playtesters. You are here to listen and learn. So I just didn't want the whole encouragement over imposter syndrome to go too far. Because I have run into this in playtesting events, for sure. Yeah. Right around the time that I was coming to UnPub for the first time, or maybe more towards the time that I started pitching Wingspan. I don't even remember when I came across an interview with a woman who wrote this book called Go for No, which is a book that's really aimed at sort of sales and marketing people, and this concept that like in that world when you're like cold calling people to sell them insurance or whatever you cold, do people sell insurance by phone anymore? I don't know, whatever you're cold calling people to sell, you really have to churn through a lot of calls to hit on the people who are actually going to take you up on your product. And her sort of philosophy with Go for No is that you need to change your mindset from the idea that you're trying to achieve a yes every time, and instead think of it as you need to set a goal for 100 encounters, 100 no's, right? Instead of making your goal the one yes, make your goal just get through 100 no's, and the yeses come. right? And so I sort of took this to heart with game design events, with playtests, with pitching. Instead of feeling like my goal at a playtesting event is for everyone to love my game, my goal is for people to tell me how crappy my game is, and specifically in what ways is it crappy, because that is how my game will get better, right? So I hope this helps some people who are nervous about going into the big room and sitting down and like showing people your game in this very public venue, maybe for the first time. They will find things that are wrong with it, and that is awesome, right? That is exactly what you want. You want people to tell you that your game is bad, in the sense that then you will make it better. You have the ability to make it better if people tell you how it needs to be better. So you can start framing it as like, okay, how many playtests can I get through? Some of them may not feel great. But the process of going through all those playtests is what you need to get to a good game. And the same exact thing applies for pitching. You will have to probably pitch your game a bunch of times before someone says they want it. But most publishers will give you feedback. And oh my God, that's like gold, right? So go for it. Go for now. Don't pitch it before it's honestly ready to pitch, obviously. But when you think you're at that point, you probably do still have farther to go. And then meeting with publishers about it will tell you some of those holes that they see that you can make better for your next pitch. If you do it enough times, it gets a lot less scary. And my last thing is to just find your people. And this is the best thing that has come out of UnPub for me. So I came here not really being connected to the game design community at all. And there are a lot of people in the sort of DC, Baltimore region. Some of you have come from much farther, but there's a great set of folks that I really hooked into because of UnPub. And over the years, it has really driven home for me that I really like to sort of have my friends and family, who I do not hit up for playtests very often at all. And they are like my support system, my rejuvenation. I don't make them play my crappy games. I have a little bit of a luxury now that Wingspan exists that I can get anyone to play test my games. But even before that, like there are enough designers in this area that that I can really segment it and say, okay, I really want to play test with other designers because number one, it's a quid pro quo, right? I'm playtesting your game, you're playtesting my game. No one's doing me like this huge favor. We're trading favors. So already that's like much better than making your friends do you the favor of playing your game that is not ready yet. But also other designers sort of get the process. They get how bad games are when they start and how much better they can be. They get how games work and enjoy the process of thinking about what's making things go wrong and how to dig in and figure out what you could try to make it better. So even compared to like playing with just random gamers, like I have really realized over the years how valuable it is to have places like this where you can play with other designers. And so just play the heck out of each other's games, and we'll all get there eventually. That's all I had. I am happy to take questions, but also I'm curious what I left off the list. What are things that you would put on here that you've learned as you've been a designer?
When you went through your list about before and during taking the notes, you had a statement at the bottom that said after, but the
Oh.
screen was cut off. Did you have anything to say on that?
No, really, just like I feel like the after part is the obvious part, right? Like just write down what people are telling you when you're talking about game. Yeah. Man.
So you said number your cards, and I agree completely.
Yeah.
I also date them too.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
So in addition, so wherever you put your little numbering system, just tack on the date there too, because then you have a history of all the cards of like, is this an old card? Oh no, this is wrong. Throw it out. So just adding that little date would definitely help me in like tracking progress because I can see, oops, that was not supposed to be in here in the first place.
Nice.
Taking notes on the changes I make between iterations so I don't completely forget what I've done.
Yes. Right. There could have been a whole slide about like versioning, right, and keeping track of your files for sure. Okay. Switch over here.
One thing I've noticed is that a lot of people feel like they have one good game idea in them, and everything is on whatever their first game is, and sometimes you've got to leave behind, and you'll have a ton of ideas. So sometimes just shelf something and say it didn't work out. That's not good.
You can also chop it up too, which is nice. Sometimes the full thing is not right, but a little thing is. I mean, that's how apples to apples came to be.
You'll always learn something. On the topic of bits, erasers, pinata stuffer erasers make great things. You can get them for cheap.
Yeah, Matt.
I'm going to say virtual prototyping and playtesting is awesome for me personally because I'm so messy with everything. But being able to playtest with people on an international level is surprisingly awesome and like consistently really cool and helpful.
Right, you have to be careful with this one. Right? Occasionally, depending on who the playtesters are, I will tell them it's not my game. So they will be more brutal with me.
Or less brutal, like.
Well, that's why I said depends who your playtesters are. So you have to know who you're playtesting with. Because people will naturally be more critical if the person is not sitting at the table who they think is being affected by the feedback.
I will also undersell how finished I think the game is.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I've only been working on this for a couple weeks. It's really rough. You know, everything's on the table. It may actually be several months old. You can only do that in venues where, like, it's people who haven't been seeing you every week. But did you have something?
Yeah, I've learned to be less nervous, and I just wanted to share with this community that I found the gaming community to be very open, and I realize also people are people, because I used to have such a fear of interacting with people like conventions or even like presenting my game and feeling the imposter thing, but I think just like the more I do it, the more I feel relaxed about doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think on top of even talking about it as imposter syndrome, there's this whole second thing of like feeling like people might judge you for your game, which maybe happens, but in general, I think most people can sort of separate the game from the person and know that like you might make this game great sometime. Just because it's bad today doesn't mean that I'm going to judge you and think you're stupid, right?
Sure. I'll blend a couple different things that I heard and said. At least in the Seattle area, we have the luxury of kind of a couple different groups of game designers. And so we pick and choose based on what feedback we want. One of them, they're really great cheerleaders. They'll get excited with the thing and just a yes and on putting something back on the shelf. The other group is the one I go to when I need someone to tell me, yeah, this probably isn't the game. This is just, you need to walk away from this and try something else for a little while. So again, getting into like picking that group of designers that you're playtesting with based on their experiences and the kind of feedback that you're looking for.
Right, and some people like just love workshopping a game, right? And so
Right.
they'll like spend an hour or two after a playtest working on it with you, and some people won't.
Those folks are gold and will
Yeah.
save games.
When you sit down, ask, give your playtesters what you want to get out of the piece, because that way, because a lot of us are the kind of people that'll just be like, let me redesign your game for you. And it's like, I don't love that, but
I used to be the kind of person who, after a playtest, I would think of all these great ideas or want to take in all of the feedback and say, so I'm going to make 17 different changes now, and they all need to come in right now. And I guess what I learned is that I basically kind of stockpile all of those in kind of like a separate place that I can kind of reference those back, bring them back in one piece at a time. So I guess what I'm saying is iterating on very, very small changes was a huge point of learning that kind of opened things up for me.
I was going to say, to tackle onto that split testing, if you can find groups that are willing to play your game back to back with just one or two minor changes, I've become a much better designer doing that, because you can really see like the play experience and just like what works, what doesn't, especially when you're on like a crossroads.
Isolate those variables.
Piggybacking off of that, actually, I really liked limit testing. So where you specifically cut maybe in half, one particular part of the game down and simplify it, so you are specifically testing another part of the game, and the other part is not as much of a contributing factor to the play experience. So really like isolating what you're testing for by changing the game itself during the play test, specifically when trying to like break particularly challenging problems.
Sometimes early in the game design, a playtester will ask me a question, and I will not know the answer because I don't know what should happen. And the power phrase is, what do you think should happen? And they're usually right? Whatever's that's what they feel should happen. That is exactly right. You were right.
Along those lines, John Zinzer from AEG recently said to me in a playtest, when someone asks a question, try to always make the answer yes. Like if they ask, can I do this thing? Like if it is a thing that they intuitively think that they should be able to do, then the answer should be yes.
Or ask them why if you know
Right.
it's wrong.
There are times when they're really just trying to gain an edge thing or whatever, but yeah.
Any general questions for her? I think that was the first one.
For the breakfast, are non-binary folks welcome?
Sure, yes. I think we said women, BIPOC, and like other marginalized gender folks.
What was it like interacting with Mandy Patinkin on Twitter?
Yeah, it was really just a very brief. Well, I would say the weirdest part of it was like seeing words that I had written come out of Mandy Patinkin's mouth. It was a very surreal experience. But yeah, then I forget what I said, and he did respond back, so there was a little bit of interaction. It didn't go any further than just sort of a couple tweets. Yeah, it was fun. And that clip is another fantastic example of like your game is so much more complicated than you think it is. Because for those of you who didn't see it, it's like Mandy Patinkin reading the thing that we had added to Wingspan to make it easier to learn and being like completely befuddled by that.
I'm curious how many hours and how many iterations of playtesting did you go through for that? Do you have any count?
I didn't keep track. Years.
Yeah, it was at least 3 years. Because I remember playing it at Congress of Gamers at least 3 years before it got picked up.
Yeah, I started in 2014. I think I pitched it in 2016. We did a lot of development for all of 2017. It was a lot of time. A lot of time. Yeah.
Do you like where you are now as compared to where you were before Wingspan came out? Do you feel like more confident, more outgoing, or do you feel like what is that? Has that made coming to events like this a little bit more stressful?
It's easier because my point of stress is often like approaching people, and now people approach me. So it's easier in that sense. No, it's fun. I mean, it's fun to have people love a thing that you made. That's the best feeling in the world.
Ooh, I have a question. Do you feel like you're more of a mentor or like a role model now?
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, because I view you as one. So I'm curious to see if you view yourself as one.
I mean, there are definitely people that I still feel like that I can look up to.
Mm-hmm.
I have things to aspire to, but yeah, I've reached a level where a lot of people listen to what I say.
And you're up there as one of the most popular female designers now.
Can you talk a little bit about working? I know you've worked with different publishers, so can you talk a little bit about like the differences and how you felt like, did you have to approach different publishers in a different way, or?
Yeah, so my 3 games that are out now are Wingspan, which is with Stonemaier, Mariposas, which is with AEG, and Tussie Mussy, which is Button Shy. And they all came about in slightly different ways. Wingspan came first design-wise and came out first. And that was very much like me working on it. I went to Gen Con to pitch it. I set up meetings with multiple publishers. I did a lot of research ahead on like who had any hope of wanting a game about birds. And so I pitched it at Gen Con, got one bite out of all the meetings that I had, and that was Stonemaier. And that was like, take the feedback that we gave you in our meeting, go work on it again, and send it to us again. And they didn't sign it until I had sort of already made a bunch of revisions again. And then we continued to iterate a lot. But I think part of that was them sort of wanting to see that back and forth a little bit, and how did I take feedback? I don't know, that's my interpretation. So that was a little bit about the process with Stonemaier. AEG had put out a call for women designers to submit things to them because they had 0 on their roster. And they wanted to change that. And so I had sort of been working on and that came out in sort of when I was done with my work on Wingspan, but it hadn't come out yet. And I had been also working on Mariposas already, and so I sort of scrambled to get that into a submittable form and sort of sent it with a note saying, this isn't quite done, but I think there's a thing here, and hopefully you can see it too. And so they actually bit on that right before Wingspan came out, or right as it was coming out. And then Tussie Mussy was a Gen Con contest. So for people that don't go to Gen Con, there's like a little thing online, Gen Cant. And so it must have been 2018. I didn't go to Gen Con. I submitted this 18-card game, which felt just delightful after having finished the Wingspan deck. So again, like I had finished work on Wingspan, but it was like the art and production was happening. So I submitted that, and it co-won the contest along with Seasons of Race. So that's how I ended up having that game at Button Shy, and also it's an 18-card game. But that one I had designed specifically for that contest. Like I hadn't thought about it ahead of time. So it's 3 sort of very different processes. And now I have another game signed with Pandasaurus. And so across with all of those 4 games, which I didn't have to pitch because Wingspan was out and now people, it's a very different dynamic and a little scary to me, honestly, because I feel like people want my games for my name and they're not being as critical of the game itself. And I don't, like, I want people to still be really critical and still, like, put the same level of development into my game because I want my games to be good when they come out. So anyway, it's been very interesting across those 4 publishers, seeing how differently they work, and like some are much more collaborative than others and will like consult me about like, who do you want to be the artist? What do you think of the art? That's what, like, so it's been the whole spectrum of like, I just said I wanted Beth Sobel for Tussie Mussy and she did it, to like, I just got sent art for one of my games that I had not been consulted about for at all, and it's kind of okay, but I wish we had a conversation first. Like, so there's a real range of sort of publisher styles and experiences, and I don't know that we as designers have that much power to be picky about that, but there are certainly styles that I prefer over others, that I'm not going to totally name names in a public forum, but I am happy to talk behind the scenes if folks are interested in working with publishers that I have worked with. I do think as a designer it is important to have some of those conversations. Like I have, before I signed with AEG, I talked to some folks that I knew that had games with them and sort of made sure that that was a good direction to go in and that they were good to work with. Because you can definitely hear stories if you start asking around about folks that are not as good to work with. And it's tricky because people don't want to like say it totally publicly because that makes you look like a terrible person. But then for new people, you can really end up stumbling into situations that you wish you hadn't because the information isn't out there publicly. It's a little tricky.
Thank you.
You've designed a couple expansions for Wingspan, so I'm just curious your approach to designing an expansion, and also as you're designing a new game, do you think about the potential for expansions? Do you cut things out and say, okay, I'm going to save this for an expansion later, or something like that? I'm just kind of curious how that process works.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The second question, in general, no, I'm not thinking about expansions while I'm designing. Like Mario Poses, I feel like is just kind of its own thing, and I can't think of something to expand it with, and that's fine with me. I don't care. I'm not a big expansion buyer as a gamer, so maybe that's part of it. But with Wingspan, I'm super excited because of the birds, partly to like be exploring the different continents. It is hard to come up with new card powers and things that make each expansion feel like a thing that is, not only new cards. The first one was pretty much new cards, but addressing some of the most common criticisms that I heard in reviews when it came out. So like people that felt like they had a strong incentive just to spam eggs, people say, like, so a lot of the cards in Europe, I was sort of trying to give people more things to do that gave them points in a single turn. But yeah, each one really burns me out because coming up with all the card powers is a lot of work. And this is very specific to Wingspan, but coming up with the list of birds that balances all of the different interlocking parts, but is true to the actual living birds is really hard. And it's like this specific problem that I have created that most of you will never have to deal with. Like, you can just make up the features of your creatures and balance them all perfectly, and I can't. Yeah.
Are there any things that hit the cutting room floor
you thought was a pretty good idea at the time for Wingspan or any for the other two games that you maybe not necessarily regret, but kind of have emotions of not including in the game?
That's a good question. I can't think of anything off the top of my head for published games. It's more that I definitely have designs that I have started that I can't figure out how to move them forward and are sort of sitting on the shelf, and maybe someday I'll get to them. And that has a little bit more of that regretful feeling of like, oh, if only I could figure it out, but I can't. Yeah, I can't think of anything I'm sad to have left out of something. Like I really am very happy with the stuff that I've put out.
Do you have a different hat you put on when you are a playtester instead of a designer? And do you have advice for playtesters who are also designers, I imagine?
So like, how do I think about being a playtester?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I do often ask the question, several people have referenced of like, what are you looking to get out of this playtest? Where do you feel like this game is? Who's it for? Some of those questions ahead of time, if I remember to do it. Yeah, what is my advice as a playtester? A lot of that, like trying to be sensitive to that. I find it really helpful when playtesters talk out loud during the game about, like, if it's taking them a minute to make a decision, like, what are the things they're considering? Like, is that interesting? Do they feel stuck? To, like, just, like, say out loud anything that you're thinking, and it might be helpful within reason. Some of you are maybe more talkative than that. Than would be appropriate in that context, but in general, that's really helpful. Like, I want to know, is it taking you a long time because you're completely overwhelmed by the choices, or because it's a really interesting and difficult choice? You know, those sorts of things. And that's the sort of thing that people often don't bother to say out loud.
Do you like to do your own development, or do you prefer that someone comes in once it's been like signed with the publisher?
Oh, I love having a developer.
Okay, I was gonna say because you solo design, so
I think that is the most valuable thing that one of the most valuable things that you get out of going with a publisher instead of going it alone. So like Wingspan would not be the game it is without having had Jamie Stegmeyer working on it with me for the last year. Even though he was mostly just like, he'd play test it, he'd send me a long email. I'd go work on it for a couple more months. He'd send me a long email. So like, I was still mostly hands-on in that case, but he was definitely developing it, even though he wasn't putting in the time of like making a new prototype himself. And then with AEG, it's been much more like they take over and Pandasaurus too. Like they have developers that have really like taken over the hands-on work, which is great if I have something else that I'm working on. I do reach a point sometimes where it's like, wait a minute, like that's my baby. My experiences with developers have been overwhelmingly positive, for sure.
And a follow-up to that, how do you work with the co-designer
I am working with a co-designer now on a game that I have about mushrooms. He is actually the guy who developed Mariposas, so we enjoyed working on that so much together that we're like, we should do another game. And so now he's going to be full co-designer. And actually on my Fox game, the developer made some really significant changes that I loved so much that I was like, we're putting his name on the box. Like, because it was a big deal what he did, and it's really smart. So he sort of became a co-designer. I will admit that for me, having done so much solo, co-designing is not an entirely comfortable process. because I do like the control. But it is awesome in the sense that sometimes you can really bounce things back and forth. Like, I'm going to work on it this week and play test, and then bounce it back to the other person, and you can go do something else while they're working on it for a while. And I think that can be really productive and refreshing. I think it can move faster to work like that. I'm not sure I love it. I really enjoy the people I'm working with, but I'm not sure I would always seek it out. I do like working on my own. Yeah.
One of the things that I've become a little bit anxious about in thinking about making a game, setting it, if somehow it got signed or something like that, going down this avenue, is environmental impact. And I realize that board games are a very small thing, and board games are not, big power plants that are doing things in the atmosphere. But it is something that I'm genuinely anxious about, and given your the fact that a lot of your games are about the natural world, and also your standpoint and involvement with larger social issues that are involved with that. I'm just wondering your point of view on that. And this is not with any foregone conclusion, because I love having the tactile, the actual tactile element. And I also spent too much money on the Marvel United Kickstarter, so I'm not in any way saying that I'm blameless or throwing stones in a glass house, but I'm just curious of your outlook on that, just given what you've worked with.
Yeah, your intuition is right that it is something I care about. It is not something that I felt like I knew how to approach it as a first-time designer talking to publishers, and that I had any power in that interaction. That's shifting a little bit. And Stonemaier is really starting to look at it. They have actually gotten Panda to buy some new pieces of equipment to experiment with some stuff, like molded cardboard inserts instead of molded plastic. They're talking about possibly switching the eggs from being plastic to wood, which has its pros and cons. And I think the eggs are plastic. I see the look on Ian's face. They're not wood.
Really?
Yeah.
The original game had plastic?
They are plastic. Yeah. They feel like wood, but they're plastic.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Right. And plastic. Wood has its concerns too, because it's trees. But Panda does have the ability to do like the FSC certified stuff, or whatever the equivalent is for them. But plastic, even recycled plastic, has a certain level of environmental impact. I suspect, especially in China, because they have so little oversight over environmental stuff. So I think a lot of people don't realize, because we in the United States hear a lot of messaging over the disposal of items, but the manufacturing of plastic itself is really harmful. Recycled plastic gets ground down into little pellets of plastic, and those pellets escape and get into the environment, and birds eat them, and it's bad. And new plastic has its own whole suite of chemical issues that get out into the environment from the manufacturing. So it's not only the question of I'm buying this board game and I'm never going to get rid of it, so I don't have to worry about the disposal of this plastic. It's a good thing that the plastic will last forever. But it's what had to happen to get that plastic into the box in the first place. So the whole mini thing just really concerns me, because that's a lot of plastic, and a lot of people get really excited about the minis. And they're just not great for the environment.
Are you able to, just to follow up, are you able to divulge some of the things that you're able to do now, or you would
it's really just trying to think about what it can. I feel like with the contracts that I have currently signed, I didn't say anything up front, and I'm not pushing super hard, although I'm making it known that it's something that I care about. But going forward, I'm trying to figure out, like, I want to have more of those conversations at the point of signing a game. Because I feel like once you've signed the contract, it's a little bit like the publisher has already made certain assumptions about what they're going to do. Because doing stuff better is usually more expensive, right? And so, like, I do think you have to have that up front. And I think as more publishers start asking to do it and start experimenting with things, so little things like not wrapping your cards in a piece of plastic, but just putting a paper band around them and things like that, I think are not significantly more expensive, and it is less plastic. I know there's concern with shrink wrapping games about damage to the box, and also apparently about moisture in the box. And so that's something that Stonemaier was going to do a print run where they experiment with not shrink wrapping and let them sit in a warehouse for a little, like let a set of them, not a huge number, sit in a warehouse for a while and see if that's as much of an issue as the shrink wrap people have always told them that it is. So there's a lot of, like, people literally have to experiment with some of this stuff and figure out the right way to do it because people haven't done it enough yet to know what works. So it's good. We all have to ask for it as consumers and as designers. And so, like, comment on Kickstarters, right, about, like, I hope some of the plastic could be lessened a little bit. There's so much demand for it. Like, someone needs to say, like, actually, I'm not excited about those minis. I don't know. I'm probably shouting into the void on that one.
All right, do we have any last questions? Because we've technically gone over by quite
a
bit.
no.
So, yeah, I know, it's always like a conversation. Oh, it's 4:30? Oh, sweet, never mind. Last question.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you said about the imposter syndrome and the relationship of us as developers and developers. I'm curious about how you feel about your relationship with subject matter folks. Like, when you went to the Burning Convention, like, how does that feel? And now you've got all these different topics in different areas, and all of them have communities that really care about the topic.
Yeah, that definitely. I get more imposter syndrome now going to birding events than going to because I am a very intermediate birder. Like, I'm probably better than most of you, but if I go to like a birding thing, I am like better than beginner level, but not great. My husband's a much better birder than I am. So yeah, that's funny. It's definitely true. It's. I always have this little feeling and pit in my stomach of like, oh God, I'm gonna put something on a card that's just patently wrong.
Have you had that happen?
I have gotten some corrections, and they get sort of quietly fixed in future on stuff that doesn't matter for the gameplay.
If you look at card 174, you'll see some handwritten notes.
I was just curious about the research that went into like getting the accurate information about the birds. Was that directly you? Were you bringing in other people? How'd that happen?
No, it was all me.
All you?
I mean, from other people's research. So there's a couple of great sites. Cornell Lab of Ornithology has all about birds for North American birds, and then for the world, they recently acquired a site called the Handbook of Birds of the World, which has similar information, but for all birds ever. You have to pay for that one. And it's amazing, and it still doesn't have everything. And one horrible fact that I learned is that wingspan is not actually a measurement that other parts of the world uses often. They use other measurements of like they'll go from basically the shoulder to the wingtip, which then so wingspan, if it's from one wingtip to another, it really matters what the size of the bird's body is, and that's left out in Asia is almost all shoulder to wingtip. And so I just sort of see what I could find on other sources and sort of extrapolate from other birds in the same family is a mess.
I have a comment and a question. One thing not to do with these birders is to make kind of a fun game out of saying there's a red-throated whatever you decide over there, and they're like, that's from South America. Anyway, I did it once on Monhegan Island, but my fun question is, if you were to pack 1 or 3 games to take on a vacation, what could you play all the time?
Oh man.
Not yours, not including yours.
I kind of have the answer to this because I have a quiver that I take with me on card trips. It has Lost Cities, The Crew. What else? Those are the 2 that come out a lot. Point Salad is in there right now. I don't know. Those are 3 good ones. I'm blanking on what else is in there. Seven Wonders Duel. I have like squeezed in there.
Since all your themes are more nature-based, are there any themes that you would like never touch? So like, are you never going to do a space game? You're never going to do a train game? Are there like any themes that you don't tend to gravitate towards, either playing or thinking about designing?
I mean, I wouldn't rule them out, but I definitely, like, Wingspan came to be because I felt like there were too many games about trains and castles. So yeah, I don't know. I started a game, actually, at UnPub 2019, I played one half-assed game of this idea that I have about stunt people. I am not totally committed to. Ian was there. He's cracking up. Right, and then the pandemic happened, and like that game could not be play tested online, and and I haven't pulled it back off the shelf because I've had plenty of other stuff going on. So I'm not like totally committed to only doing nature stuff, but that's like the stuff that comes naturally to me. That's what I spend my time thinking about outside of games. And weirdly, stunt people are not. That's the one actually that came from an obituary. I read an obituary of this woman who was like a pioneering female stunt person, and also like holds land speed records for doing crazy stunt car based things. I don't know. Anyway, she's wild, and it just got my brain like, how is there not a game about stunt people? I don't know.
One more question? There we go.
Would you say that from a design perspective that you feel the game is done when you have nothing left to add or nothing left to take away?
Both, right? I don't know. I don't think either one of those is really the way that I think about it. Because it's so much more granular than that almost, and just like tweaking things and not necessarily adding or subtracting, but changing math or changing rules. I don't really think about it, but it's more the feeling of just like people have very little feedback at the end of the playtesting session. People start asking you if they can buy a prototype from you. That was when I started pitching. That was when I decided to go to Gen Con and pitch Wingspan. It was when someone asked me if they could buy my prototype.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.